welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, the critical thinker at large, coming at you from my couch. This time, normally I am elsewhere located, but this week I am doing a live couch interview with Andrew Forlines. And Andrew is a local atheist here in Denver that I met at the Secular Hub, and he does cooking, he does comedy, he does all kinds of fun stuff. So I thought we would just have a little informal chat here and talk about some things, and including his experience growing up in the ATI/Bill Gothard group or cult or whatever you want to call that. As anybody who's watched my channel knows, I have interviewed Christiana Miner about her experiences with that, and Andrew had a different experience, which is, and not quite as extreme as hers, but we are going to talk about some of that too, and his journey into atheism. So welcome, Andrew.
Well, thanks for having me, Chris.
Yeah.
It's a very comfortable couch, I'll just say that.
Yeah, I like my couch.
Yeah,
it's making its debut video appearance right now on my channel.
It's a good couch. Yeah, I grew up in, we called it ATIA, because originally it was the Advanced Teaching Institute of America. Then they dropped the last A. But we still always called it ATIA.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I actually did not know that. In all the study I've done, I didn't know that one.
And I love it because it's Advanced Teaching Institute. It's the IBLP is Institute for Biblical Life Principles. Right?
Basic life principles. I think.
Basic life principles. Yeah. I just love the gibberish. Like an acronym is only as strong as the words that it forms, but obviously cults don't really need it. Very circular. It reassures itself.
That's right. Well, language is very, very important in destructive cults. Specialist language and the key definitions, specialized definitions and ideas, because it helps ingrain thought processes that keep the indoctrination in place. Language is interesting that way. So we were just talking briefly beforehand here. So you were born in California.
Yep.
Just like me.
Yep.
Yeah, you're from Sacramento.
Sacramento,
yeah. It's where my parents, my mom and my brother live there now.
Oh, okay.
But I grew up south, down in Pasadena.
Okay.
And but then you moved to Ohio.
That's right. We moved to Cincinnati when I was 8.
Okay. And that is where you guys hooked up with the Gothard materials.
That's when we started. Yeah, I think it was the church we started going to there. Bethel Baptist was a little fundamentalist safe haven for my parents. They started taking us there, and the whole church was nothing but mostly large families like the Duggards, and we had a lot of ATIA families there. So we'd have the speakers would come, the circuit of speakers doing their the sermons and stuff for ATIA.
Oh, is that a thing?
Yeah. There's a whole circuit. The funny thing is that my parents, we ended up moving to Colorado when I was 17. My parents did, because that's where their Christian marriage counselor lived. And that was, my dad was like, I'll just get my wife to shut up if I move near them. And it was very strange. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
But yeah, so we went to that church, and we'd have the chalk art. Are you familiar with chalk art?
Tell me.
See, now you're not a true.
No.
You really got in there unless you're familiar with chalk art.
Bring it. Tell me.
All right. So chalk art was, I think Gothard did it a lot himself, and we'd have people in the church, like the youth pastor would do it, and during the more casual indoctrination sermons, like your Wednesday night, and you're not so stringent ones, they would do. So it'd be on easel, big piece of paper, and they'd start drawing chalk and draw mountains and an eagle and something usually patriotic and religious, and usually it would be an animal or a scenery, and they would tell a parable around that. You got to be like the goat, and you got to have a strong will or whatever to resist science, and
you gotta resist science.
Yeah, you do. That evolution, as my parents called it. I got to keep it at bay.
God.
Yeah, it's good stuff. And so they would do this chalk, and it'd be a waterfall, and then they would change the lights. You'd turn the lights down, and they'd turn on a black light. And before they started drawing in front of everybody, they had drawn in like this neon chalk that only lit up under certain light. So sometimes, the colors would really pop, and then you'd see something that you didn't see before kind of come out. So then there'd be like a floating Jesus above the waterfall. Yeah. Yeah, chalk art was awesome.
Wow, interesting. I had not heard of that.
Mm-hmm,
okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Interesting. So, what was your experience? What would you say your overall experience with the Gothard teachings were growing up? You were in a family of 4 boys, yeah?
Yeah, we were a small family. My parents, stopped accepting God's gifts relatively early in the family building process. Yeah, I have 3 brothers. I'm the third of 4.
Right, 4 kids, small family.
The 4 Forlines boys. Yeah. We only had a minivan. We didn't have a full van,
Right. Well, I guess if the standard is 19 and counting, then 4 is like minusculely tiny. You guys aren't even contributing hardly anything.
No. We were a failure. Like we were letting the church down.
Right, and not very quiverful. You were sort of quiverless.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what was the experience like growing up with this stuff?
Yeah, it was not fun. It was bad, Chris.
Okay.
It was bad.
Okay.
It's used as a tool to indoctrinate and as a tool to control. And I see it now. The way I view it now is it's really just like a cult franchise.
Mm-hmm.
So the families all get to erect their own franchise and then pay into the larger cult. So what's so tricky about ATIA is that it's a little more nebulous than your centralized cults, because it's it's enacted in small pockets all over, per the church and then by each family. So I would say we were more of one of the failing franchises. It didn't stick. It didn't take in any of us kids. And then my father was dogmatic and still is, but my mother just wouldn't follow through with the teachings as much at home. So we were just more of isolated and left to our own devices. So my brothers and I were kind of raised as a feral pack of children, fending for ourselves. Yeah, they'd throw food at us occasionally.
God. Wow. Now you mentioned when we were talking before, and I will say I'm actually this is kind of funny because your characterization of the ATI and your experience is almost exactly conceptually is exactly the same as I worded it. But you haven't seen the videos I did with Christiana.
No, I haven't seen those yet.
And we didn't really talk about this in these terms beforehand. So I have to say it's fascinating because we I guess nailed it, as far as the homegrown cult, family cult.
Right, the formula. Yeah, I mean that's what the wisdom books and all the materials. It's like a starter pack for some asshole father to shape the world in his desired way.
Yeah.
By restricting their children's perception of the world is what they're manipulating it, because they don't. If underneath of all, and this is what makes it unsustainable and unstable, at least for me, was that they were always, my parents and my father specifically was always saying, well, I've experienced the world and now I want you to experience a version that I think I'm going to protect you from things. Therefore, he never trusted any of us to be capable enough to even withstand, if he was, teaching us to be strong in Christ or whatever, to even withstand it. He's like, no, we're just going to not allow you to engage in that stuff or be aware of it. So it's always, it's always a hierarchical situation. And to me, that's, something that I wouldn't want to live in.
Well, for sure. And it occurs to me as you're talking about that it's really doing such a disservice to the kids to not prepare them, which is not to say that you have to, take your kids down to, Watts or Compton or something and throw them into the middle of, some horrible, awful situation in order to prepare them for the world. I mean, the world can be a bad place in some places, but I think that if there's no exposure to that, if there's no concept of what the world's really like, and you're raised in this sort of half utopian kind of, thing.
Yeah.
That just is not really good for where the kids are eventually going to go.
No, not at all. It inhibits growth, emotional development and ability to, even navigate the world as you need to, because you are being deferential to your parents for so long. Yeah, it's just a disservice to everyone. And the real question I have that I think I've reached out, and I know quite a few other fellow homeschoolers. We've connected on online forums and that kind of thing. And it really comes down to, people's rights. How far does a parent's rights go to religious expression when it starts to infringe upon, a child's right to learn and to grow and to develop? Mm-hmm. And I think they're really at odds with each other. And the question is that doesn't get brought up is like, where's the line drawn, and where, as a society, should we let it exist? And I just don't think there's any acknowledgement. Mostly because homeschooling is largely unacknowledged, and its ill effects are unacknowledged in the mainstream because it's a small percentage of people have done it, but also I think by the nature of homeschoolers themselves, a lot of us go through a phase of, I'm going to pretend it didn't happen if you get out. So if you're still in it, then you're perpetrating it on the next generation. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the numbers are, if anyone's found out, but I don't think that actually is happening a whole lot. There's definitely people that are in those churches, stay in them generation after generation, but then a lot of people get out, kind of similar to the Amish. A lot of people do come out and live in the world, but what they want to do, and what I did for a long time, was, I'm going to pretend I wasn't homeschooled, and I'm not going to acknowledge it. Then if I can convince other people that I'm normal, then I'll feel normal myself. So it's almost as if all the victim homeschoolers that were victims of this want to deny it also for their own benefit, not even just to protect their oppressors, but just for their own sake. So I think it's really actually a very rare and small percentage that get out and then would actually put effort in towards raising awareness or trying to dismantle the system in any way. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we see some examples of that on the Recovering from Grace website. Mm-hmm. And there are some real horror stories that come out of some of the families that that use this program, and I've broken down why that is in the videos that we made. It's an indoctrination system. But the question you raise is one I was actually going to ask you, so I'm glad you brought it up, and that is, where is that line? You have a lot of very strong ideas and attitudes about this from some parents, especially religious ones. But the reason we talk about these things in a podcast format like this is to try to caution people out there. Mm-hmm. The thing, just because a belief system works for you doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for your kids or your other family members, right? And this is something, religion is an extremely personal thing. Mm-hmm. And the beliefs, I think personally that religious belief is probably, if you could peer into people's heads, I think it's as unique as fingerprints or DNA. I think everybody has their own very specific ideas about the afterlife and religion and God and these kind of things. And I think you'd find, some pretty interesting differences. Like I said, you could peer into people's heads. But my point is that, therefore, what you might work for you, you might think, yes, this is what's helped me. This is what's gotten me off the drink. This is what's gotten me off the drugs. Therefore, it's going to help everybody else get off the drink or get off the drugs or lead a pure life or have a relationship with Christ or whatever problem that religion is solving for you isn't necessarily going to solve that same problem for other people. And I think that might be one point I'd like to bring up in this, but I'm curious what your take is on, from your own experience with this.
Yeah.
Where do you draw the line with children? They're blank slates. They come out, they don't have a whole lot there. There's a parental responsibility to prepare them, but how does this work for you?
Yeah, for me, to be honest, I'm currently conflicted on what, is the best way if to raise children from seeing that the extreme that I went through, which was no formal education, and then also the school system isn't anything that's super great either. It's got its faults too. So,
that's right. A lot of homeschoolers are justified in doing homeschooling.
Sure.
This isn't some rant against homeschooling.
Right.
It's just
right, the religious component of it. I think that's an interesting question, and it's one that I don't know if there is an answer that anyone can make. Like, who can make a decision for who is really what it comes down to. Can you, as a society, impose some of these things on families? Yeah, you can. There's things that are mandated, or there's things that we've agreed are good for everybody. And then your point with, if something's good for someone, with your analogy, is that in that situation, the father who thinks the religion is good, so he's going to give it to his children, he made that decision. He got to make the decision for himself.
Right.
Now he's imposing it on others, and it's when you impose on others. I think it comes down to the way people view their duty as a parent and what their children are. I don't really agree with the notion of a child really being a blank slate, in that we have to teach them the things, and if you don't, then they will never get it. Children, either there's innate and intrinsic things that us as humans believe in, and children develop them as their brain develops. So they come online and then are able to be engaged. Whereas I think some people, fundamentalists, believe that it's their direct teaching those children are what will imprint upon them those beliefs. And I don't see it that way. I see it as, you're guiding the development of a human. You're not deciding the development of a human.
Well, I guess that answers the question in terms of what would you like to see, because I think very definitely there are parents out there who feel that they are not guiding. They are the ones who have to. That's their role. That's how they understand their function, and that's where indoctrination comes into play, right? And what I mean by a blank slate, and just to be clear about this, in case there's any misconception, is there's just, when they come out, they don't. There's nothing there. It's not like there's a belief in God, or there's a belief in Muhammad, or there's some innate thing that's sitting there, and they're that's a deeper question. Like, when they come out, when they're newborn. Yeah. But do you mean as a human wouldn't develop that unless they were taught that and socialized it? I'm saying that the degree and the method of introducing those concepts to a child can either be done in a way where the child can make a choice, or the child has no choice. There's two different things going on there. And I would tend to go in the direction of, could we do this in such a way that the information is presented without the enforcement of, you are going to believe this is how it is, and there is no other way to it. Yeah, but they're completely separate things. Okay. Religion is just one of the many tools that people use as a method of control. Oh, sure. And the flavor of religion can change. It doesn't really matter. There is intrinsic belief in a higher power, or in a creator. That's intrinsic in all of us. You can read a really good book by Jesse Baring, is The Belief Instinct, and it goes into that. Like, if it wasn't, then why would it have got started in the first place for us to create a God? But the expression goes, if there is no God, man would have needed to create one anyway. But what about people who never have a belief in God then? What people are these? Like, historically, there has always been a belief in some kind of higher power. I'm not talking in general terms. I mean, like, for example, people I've met at the Hub. I never believed in God. I wasn't raised that way. I never bought into it. I've always thought there was nothing. Yeah, I've had those conversations with people. Sure. And so the society now actually lends itself more to not having a need to fill that unknowing. So in evolutionary psychology, uncertainty is a very unsettling thing for someone to be in, right? So if you look, as we're evolving, we want to pacify
the uncertainty enough so that we can go about the day-to-day activities we need.
Mm-hmm.
So, the whole idea of needing a God is that we have too much perception. As an animal, we're perceiving more than is necessary to procreate. It's almost a fluke of evolution that we do, in my understanding of it.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So, I guess going back to the child rearing, what's your idea about that then? Like how?
Where's the line, or how do you raise a child?
Yeah. Well, where's the line in terms of enforcement versus education versus indoctrination? I mean, that's sort of how you got onto this.
For me, it's preparing a child to be a functioning, happy, healthy adult in the world in which we do exist and live. And how do you give them the tools necessary to thrive and navigate in that, as opposed to some kind of, manipulating their perception of the world to get a desired behavior, which is what indoctrination, what my parents tried to do.
Right.
Yeah. So the line is that you're hurting someone's ability to fully develop into somebody. But you can go in. I mean, society at large has got an issue with that, with not allowing each other to develop fully, or embracing, our full potential. Everybody wants somebody else to behave more like themselves to validate the way that they're behaving.
Okay. So how did you go from this situation, out of this situation?
From being homeschooled?
Well, yeah, because you're an atheist.
I prefer to refer to myself as a humanist.
Great.
So I believe, I don't necessarily think that we have the capacity to even understand or comprehend whether or not there is a God. I think it's a question that we put upon ourselves and then answer ourselves. And to me, I'm too preoccupied in my immediate surroundings, which are humans, and making life better for them and the community here, and I don't need to get to answering that question, because I don't need an answer, a definite answer.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, but the pathway for how I got out of the homeschooling.
Yeah.
Right.
Into this, and because you were not raised in a secular environment.
No.
And I suppose if your father and your mother had their druthers, you would not be of a secular path.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, no, absolutely. We're myself and my brothers are eternal source of disappointment. My dad actually won't get on Facebook because he doesn't want the friends throughout his life seeing his life, because it didn't plan out the way he wanted.
Oh,
yeah, we're all just disappointments.
Feels that way.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't wish that on anybody.
Because he's like, I get all these emails of people telling me to join. No, he did join Facebook to keep up with my brother, who has two sons of his own. So to see the pictures of his grandsons put on Facebook, and he was on there, and he just kept getting all these friend requests from high school and college and work throughout his life. He's like, I just don't want him to see my life or whatever. Is like how he phrased it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, but you, because we met at the Secular Hub, right? And Secular Hub, of course, is exactly what it says. It's a secular group. So people tend to be attracted to the Secular Hub by humanism, atheism, agnosticism, or Freedom from Religion Foundation. I mean, these are the things that tend to attract people in that direction, and looking for community, looking for people of like mind, or some degree of activism, right? Or volunteerism, which all of those things happen through the Hub. So, well, I guess how did you go from that situation? You'd mentioned you and your brothers never really took, so you weren't deeply fundamental, and then deconverted from that. But how? No,
not per se. I mean, I navigated as a child within it to seek approval from my parents as best I could. I never really felt like I believed. I always had some doubt. But also, which was an interesting wrinkle, which I don't think happened with other homeschoolers as much, was that my relatives on my mother's side were not believers, and were sowing seeds of doubt, and uncertainty, so that, I didn't feel there was only one way of believing or thinking, which is what my parents were trying to force on me, which never really quite clicked or made sense. And I'm like, well, if you all are so great, why are you assholes and why am I so miserable all the time? So it's like, here's a fun homeschooling joke. It's like, what's the worst part of being so depressed when you're 13 that you don't go outside for 6 months?
What?
Nobody noticed. Hey, that's right. See, there's room in the comedy world for homeschoolers too.
Right. Right. Okay. So you always had that. You like I said, you never really totally drunk the Kool-Aid. In other words, right? You never totally went into that.
No, I didn't. I didn't have their belief. Actually, I was their dogmatic belief stoked curiosity in me. I had the seeds of doubt from my grandparents and my uncle on my mother's side. My grandfather would quote like Einstein and said, what did he say? Like, if there's a God, why would he care about us? Or, it's just our day to day isn't going to be that much of interest to him. But anyway, there was doubt. And then I was also very intrigued, really about discovering why my parents behaved the way they did. So I actually started reading a lot about psychology, evolutionary psychology, to understand what motivated them, which then taught me more about myself and others and psychology and evolution and all that. So I've always just been very curious. And as lacking as the formal education was, which was nothing, I would raid the library constantly. Like, we got to go to the library, all the librarians knew me. I'd go and fill up a tote bag or two. And so I read a lot. So very autodidactic. I self-trained or whatever, and just whatever I was interested in. And no matter how disapproving my parents were of what I was reading, most of the time I wouldn't let them know, or I would hide it a little bit, but they never, I guess it was a line they didn't want to cross and have to deal with themselves. It was like they weren't going to forcibly remove material from me.
Okay.
So there was that. And then I would hide, like we weren't supposed to read Harry Potter, so I hid in the tent trailer out in the barn. We'd pop that up in the summer, and I'd go hang out in there, and I'd be reading
Harry Potter
because it was bad.
Contraband, banned book list.
Yeah, but then by like the third book, I was like, I don't care. I got brazen. I'm like, yeah, I read Harry Potter. So what? Mom, what are you gonna do?
Wow.
I haven't sprouted horns yet.
Well, I will say that you're certainly, for lack of a formal education, you don't come across as somebody who suffered from a lack of a formal education. So you did manage to extricate yourself from that fairly well.
Yeah, I present well.
Well, you're going to sit here and talk about evolutionary psychology. That presents fairly well.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, see, humans, we're built to suffer in a way. We know how to suffer. We can suffer, and you grow through suffering. But it's what I've found. It's really the suffering alone. It's the suffering in isolation that can be the most problematic. In that, if you don't have anyone to help you through these situations, they're just going to grow. Like, your inner demons grow out of proportion to reality. So as long as I was never in school, and I didn't have, peers of my age group to ever compare myself to, then I don't know how far behind I am. Actually, it's been a huge letdown. Society has been just a massive letdown, one after another, of just how people didn't utilize that freedom that was denied me, in a sense. But through my own insecurity and thinking I was behind, I pushed myself to learn even more, to the point that I overshot or bridged the gap. But yeah, when you don't have anyone to compare yourself to, then you just have your imagination. So it can be overwhelming. Yeah, and don't let this fool you. You know, I went through a lot to get to act so natural.
Well, that is actually what I was curious about, right? Because I was curious. You know, when I learned that you had grown up in a Gothard household, I was instant. I mean, having been exposed to as much of it as I have, I was very, very curious about what that experience was like for you and how you overcame it.
Right. Yeah, it was a bit lonely, isolating. So we were kind of, my parents' paranoia and not wanting us to get contaminated by the world led them to isolate us from society and homeschool us. But then even in the homeschool community, they protected us from, you know, sheltered us from others. So we weren't in a homeschool group. We didn't do homeschool things together. And so it was very isolating. It was very stifling, very inhibiting in the emotional development and growth. And so, you know, my 20s were a little rough because you age out of being homeschooled at some point, and you do have to go out in the world. And luckily I got into a working trade accreditation program. So I worked and learned and got a certificate, you know, a degree at, like, a culinary school. But yeah, there was a lot of you know, there was some alcohol abuse in my past. I haven't drank for 3 years now, and I'm on some meds, so
Okay.
that helps a bit. Yeah, the growing up. I mean, your interest in what you've researched is about the impact of the indoctrination on those who get indoctrinated.
Yes.
And I think I'm a bit of an outlier in that I wasn't properly indoctrinated. I was trapped within a very small and isolated family unit, and that had an oversized impact. You know, I was dependent upon emotionally my parents and my brothers and my small family, you know, my extended family, but the family unit was the entirety of my social network.
Right.
So their importance is grown, you know, to an unhealthy measure, to the point where even when I went out into society, no one was as meaningful as they were. So no matter how much I was embraced, I couldn't internalize it until I really learned to disengage with that unhealthy amount of significance my family had.
Okay.
So the emotional impact was deep and troubling, but the dogma and the indoctrination itself of my beliefs, to where I put on, you know, blinders to the rest of the world, didn't quite happen the same way.
Okay.
That I think it does happen to a lot of people in homeschooling.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing. I think it's hard to make a broad swath or statement about homeschooled kids or the experience, because they're almost by definition it's such a unique situation. Absolutely. You know, so I think some families do it right. I think some families do it wrong, and some are just kind of bumbling around and do some good and some bad. Right. You know. And this is one reason why we have formal education, is because at least there's some kind of structure there. Yeah. But I'm not poo-pooing homeschooling, and I'm not necessarily.
I am. I'll do it. I'll go on record right now. Although I'm conflicted too, because I mean, the institutions of education in this country are horrifically outdated as well, and are a tool of indoctrination in their own right.
That is correct.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, I'll go on record as saying I think it's, you know, insane that we have a, you know, nationalist policy of everybody has to stand and pledge to the flag and this kind of thing. This is just nationalism.
Well, yeah,
right?
it's a horrible nationalism, which is is disgusting. And
Right.
we
Well,
need
it's
to
indoctrination.
It is indoctrination, and that's, Noam Chomsky talks about that we're the only democratic nation that has nationalistic tendencies. It's not something other than a dictatorship would embrace or encourage,
Right.
because it doesn't serve anyone except those in power. And it's disgusting, yeah. So, and you can look at high school. The high school's development and implementation is back when we went through an industrialization process, went from an agricultural society to an industrialized factory working one. So you can actually look at the history of it, when we went from the agrarian single room school to a regimented high school. Was all about getting the population and the workforce ready for factory work. So you have schools that are managed by time with a bell. It's a work bell, just like the work whistle. So you can actually look at its actual form and structure was to get these country rubes ready for the factory. Mm-hmm. That's all there is to it. And the fact that we're still have that system in place, it just shows you the failings of our society as a whole.
Okay.
That's how I feel.
I'm glad that you are a man of strong feelings about that.
Yeah.
And I get your point. And I'm not somebody who's going to sit here and debate that, because I feel that that you're making some valid points on that. I think for me, in the way that I approach this, I am just kind of bummed that the people who grow up with this system, grow up in this system, and I'm one of them, can't see past the system. Mm-hmm. And so they can't think of any other way it could be. So it's America, and it's, this is how it is, and this is the flag, and how dare you.
Right.
If you at all are critical of these things, then somehow, you're not patriotic, you're not this, you're not that, all of these things are bad. And no, I don't. Doesn't speak to me of a critical thinking.
Yeah,
mind.
it's not very mature. But we're not a very mature nation as a whole, because we don't even allow for those debates to happen. There are, like you're saying, this is the only way that I acknowledge it ever being. So this is therefore is the only way I acknowledge it can be.
Exactly.
And that goes to speak to the that there are no legitimate arguments towards a schooling system, or towards what we have now as a society. There aren't really valid channels, and that's because most all of media is corporately run, that has corporate mandates and decisions that want to protect itself. No system is willingly going to self-destruct.
Exactly. And so so we don't have a lot of debate on that. And I was just thinking something and I just forgot it, so I'm just going to move on from that thought. Now, you've I want to finish this journey of yours, because coming out of this family situation, we talked about homeschooling.
Yep.
That was what I was going to say, is that, again, in defense of homeschooling, or in defense of the whole concept of it, or whatever, I will say that I totally get why people would turn to that as an alternative when faced with the issues of public schooling. That's all.
Yeah, and I would that reminds me of something. Is homeschooling is just that goes into, instead of us addressing and being heard and fixing systemic problems. Systemic problems need systemic solutions.
Yeah.
You're not going to fix a system by individuals opting out of it to fix it themselves. So if the public school is a problem, then go fix that. Don't pull your kids out and then ignore it. And then
it's a rough go, though, because when the rubber meets the road, what's Joe and Jane Sixpack supposed to do when they've got their kids in front of them? They're not going to march down to the school board and say, well, I want it this way. And the school board's going to go, oh, well, okay. It doesn't really...
Sure, and that's why a lot of people put kids in public school or private school if they can afford it.
That's right.
Which is another way of opting out. And what I'm saying is that in what you've just said is, to me, is a sign of indoctrination as a society when we abdicate our power and say, well, I'm Joe Schmo and I can't get anything done. That is not we shouldn't come to that. It shouldn't come to that at all. my voice should matter in my community, so the board should listen to the parents. But we're in a system of corporate oligarchy, and the government's been taken over by corporate interests that they don't even care. Like, they don't even listen to us. You can look at all the legislation that actually passes. There was a study out that 70+% of it directly positively impacts the 1% and industry, and not the people. And it almost is, it's irrelevant what either side of the political spectrum base believes, because the policymakers make policy that don't reflect those beliefs at all whatsoever.
Right.
They make speeches that reflect those beliefs, but they don't make policy. And as long as the policy doesn't get shown to us directly, then we don't get up in arms about it. And as long as the media, which we all trust way too much, and I don't mean that they're out to deceive us, I mean they're out to make money and do their job and be a business. I think as a whole, we all should probably turn electronics off a little more and relate to each other.
But keep watching the podcast.
Oh, this podcast, though, is people.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we're good.
Yeah. Product of homeschooling.
Yeah, it's rough. I mean, there's just tangents and
well, no, it's interesting. I mean, we've kind of now we're biting off the whole big apple here, but let's go back down a little bit down the ladder here. So okay, so again, your journey out. Let's go in a little. Let's stay back there as a child.
Like, let's go see what it was like. ATIA, we used to go to the ATIA facilities in Indianapolis.
Yes.
Because they're kind of a Midwestern thing quite a bit. Like, they're from Illinois, around Springfield or around Chicago somewhere. And then they're in Indianapolis, and they have facilities. So we used to go and live in their facilities, which there was one like downtown Indianapolis for a long time. It was it was a large building, and then one outside Indianapolis. It was like a ranch. I think it was a mental hospital they took over, and they were fixing up, remodeling. And I remember we'd go, and my dad would fix things and be handy, and us kids would help here and there. And then every summer we would go to Knoxville, which was ATIA Mecca. Every summer they would take over the University of Tennessee, and we'd be in the arena where the Volunteers played basketball, and there'd be like 15,000, kids and adults and guys in tucked in shirt with khakis, women all in their like denim hijabs that they would wear, and we go in there for a little
covered from neck to ankle
in denim.
Yep.
Sometimes khaki. The real edgy girls would wear, not there, but I remember sometimes you'd see they'd have what are the dresses that are pants, but they're like dress size?
Oh, yeah, the pantsuit sort of thing.
Yeah. Like, it was like, is that a skirt? Like, no, it's two different, but it's as big as a skirt. Yeah. Right. Anyway, we go in Knoxville, and then they'd separate boys and girls, obviously, because they do, and
because you don't know what kind of shenanigans they're going to get up to.
Well, we would work together as little kids until you're like 8 or 9 is when you go from indoor sitting on a mat and learning about the beaver and how the beaver and the platypus and the ram are all gods, and I don't know, every animal story and would have a lesson to learn. It was all animal based. It was the sheep and the goats and all that. Anyway, then every night we'd go into where the Vols play, and we'd have like a revival thing. They'd bring in the harsher the better. They bring in these firebrand preachers, and Gothard would get up. And I remember one year.
You saw the old man himself.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Gothard.
Yeah.
Come on. Me and Billy.
Me and Bill go way back.
Billy J, how you doing? Good to see you. No, we'd see him around here and there, and he would speak, but everyone would go in and you'd listen to the sermons. And one year they had us boys, because the boys, when they split us up, we do like Boy Scout stuff, was alert cadets, and then like training for rescuing and obstacle course, and then they tried to have us all a bunch of like 14 and 15-year-old, pubescent boys. Like they would put us together as a choir. And they had this one crotchety old guy trying to teach like 300 boys at once how to sing, and he was getting angry at us.
I'll bet he was.
Yeah, and then, oh God, I guess they didn't have us sing. Well, we did in front of like everybody, like 15,000 people or whatever. It was just a mess because there was a lot. That was. You were allowed to play, violin and instruments to worship God and praise God with your gifts. I will tell you,
no rock and roll.
No rock and roll. Oh God,
nothing with a beat.
Oh God, no. Beats are how you summon demons. Get it out of here.
Right.
We've all heard the stories.
Right.
The poor family goes to their missionaries and they go to help the heathens, and the child brought a CD with them secretly and they played it, and the tribe. Witch doctor came over and says, "What are you trying to summon the demon for?" Yeah. My mom, she used to raid my older brother's like CD collections and like freak out. And once my brothers lied, they were like mid or late teens or whatever, and they lied to my parents and they left with a friend. Like they went to a Tool concert or something like that.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And oh God, how did my mom find out?
Talk about rebelling.
Yeah, I know. Rebelling against, decent taste in music, right?
Oh yeah. Well, that's letting the umbrella all the way off. I mean, that's just full on. Give me the darts of Satan.
Yeah.
Just hit me with them.
Yeah.
Wow.
What happened? I think my cousin like inadvertently told my parents that they were there or went or something.
Oh, busted.
My parents freaked out, but it was like at midnight. Like my mom waked me up to go help her purge the house of the evil, and so she went, and they were at the concert, hadn't got back yet, and she like finds their CD collection hidden in their closet, and we drove it down at midnight to the church because you had to get the evil out of the house. And she called the pastor and she's crying and she's like, so he tells her to go leave them at the church and he'll deal with them and throw them away for her. Oh my God. Yeah.
Wow, what a story.
But in Knoxville, I was there 1997. Shout out ATIA fellow friends if you were there when the firebrand preacher screaming on the pulpit telling us we were all damned and going to go to hell because we were horrible, filthy heathens, dropped dead right there in front of everybody.
What?
Hit his head on the podium on the way down. I kid you not. Yeah, you can look it up. I looked it up online. Yeah, was it Charles Bonner or something? Yeah. You can look it up, and it's 1997. It was like June something.
Holy shit.
Yeah, in front of like 15,000 of us, all in the
just
thunk. And we're like, what? He's just like, you're gonna just go to hell and God's gonna smite ye. And then boom, he was out. Yeah. So when I'm on the homeschool forums, I'm always like, hey, were you ATIA? Were you there? And I was there. Oh my God. Yeah.
Wow, I have never heard that story.
Yeah. Look it up.
Damn.
Charles Bonner.
In front of all those kids.
Yeah, the poor kid. And I'm like, hey, Dad, what was his sin? Why would God punish him? Shut up, you smart ass,
Yeah, I'll bet there was a lot of cognitive dissonance going on that day.
Well, here's the thing with cognitive dissonance. It only affects people that can have two thoughts in their head at once. So they're all good. They're all good. Oh my God.
Wow, okay. Yeah, good times growing up in ATIA. Any other fun stories you want to tell?
Oh gosh. So few because I did so little, I just well, there was guard your eyes, that was the code word. So whenever we went on church outings, once in a while we'd as a church we'd go, they get all us boys and we go clean up litter on a hiking trail, or we went spelunking or something like that. And if you're out in public and there's an immodestly dressed woman, a sinful temptress, the leaders will say, guard your eyes, man, guard your eyes. And you would have to like literally physically avert your eyes.
Yep.
So and I remember like we were walking in the forest of Ohio, And I just remember every time a hiker or a jogger would come by, guard your eyes, man, guard your eyes. And we're all doing this. So I'm like, how is that going across? There's some more woman going for a jog.
What the hell with all
And
these
there's
kids?
like 25 14-year-old boys all in matching khakis and our green cadet shirt, just like, excuse me.
Well, I guess the upside there is at least she's not feeling ogled.
I guess, yeah.
You know, but geez, that would be weird. I heard, the way I heard it was that would happen, but like the Duggar family or something, or some family that was doing this, where when they were out at a mall or a shopping center or something, the girls would say Nike.
Oh, that was a code word?
That was their code word. Yeah.
Oh, they had a code word.
And then they had to look at their shoes, because that's what that meant, right? Nike. And all the boys would instantly look down to guard their eyes from, the temptation and sin of scantily clad women.
We didn't get to the point where we self-policed. I think that's the distinction here, is us kids. Yeah. I mean, we would actually all rotate, kind of like being the good son, to gain their approval and hopefully affection. Didn't work, and then we would give up because it just didn't. It's like it didn't matter. Because it's like,
sucks.
If the parents ever, I think if they ever gave any approval, they thought that we would be like, aha, I got it, I'm done. like one attaboy would have just been like, that's it. So it's like, you can never give them any carrot, because then they'll just be lazy and unmotivated.
I'm really sorry you had to have that experience.
Yeah, well, what you gonna do? Happened.
I get it.
I'm here now.
Yeah. Well, that's why we're talking. So, okay. I'm sure that we could. There's all kinds of stories with this stuff. I mean, I've already devoted hours on this channel to, the abuses and nonsense that go on in the ATI teachings, but having come out of that, what's your, I don't know, what's your take on the whole thing now? How do you look? I mean, I get, that there's some, you kind of have some peace with how you were raised to a degree, and that you've moved on from it. It happened. I mean, there's a certain degree of acceptance there. Yeah. But like, how are you moving forward now? What's your
was my time now is the it's when I truly disengaged and like hacked off that need, that like a limb, cut off that desire for acceptance, and that I realized that my parents couldn't provide it. It's really liberating. It's really liberating in that all those rules don't apply, and then I also don't have a lot of the social and rules necessarily that I think other people play to. I just don't really I don't play by people's rules, and also a lot of it's kind of I live life like it's all bonus time, like part of me is like, I survived something, almost like, I've survived something that I didn't necessarily think I would, or couldn't see. I know
exactly how that feels.
Right. I couldn't see past it. And then once I did, I was like, oh my God, it's all gravy now. Like, it's all mine. Like, so that's good in that I don't let things, nothing's going to be as painful as being, a friendless 8-year-old. So there's a bit of freedom for me in that regard. And so I can embrace things and do things with wild abandon, is what I'll say. All right. The way I look back at the homeschooling itself, like I said, it was like a cult. It was like a franchise of a cult. And to me, it just ties into bigger, as I've been elevating to the bigger tie into the bigger social problems. I actually see it, as an egregious, deformed, mutated version of self-aggrandization by the individual, most single male, like the male-driven claim for power. These are almost like little fiefdoms that they're trying to create, just to exert their own power, to feel like they have it. And I think that could stem from the fact that in this society, individuals have less power than we've ever had. We don't have that direct impact on our own lives, even in our communities. You know, we're all stuck grinding it out at jobs that don't pay what they used to, so we don't actually have any freedom. And I see homeschooling is just an egregious version of taking control and exerting control that you don't really have over people to feel like you're in control. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like we built it, mid-century. It was designed that way. Like, you even look at mid-century. So I have an issue even with the nuclear family model. I don't think that that's necessarily the ideal or the benchmark that we should all accept and not question. And if you look mid-century, when television was created and invented and started, it was like Leave It to Beaver and all that. It was almost manufactured, this individualization, and a lot of that goes back to the separation of the generations and the separation of the families into a single family unit is a way of dividing and conquering people as a nation so they don't collaborate together, but also making them dependent upon the commoditization of goods and services. So if you're not working together as a community like you used to, like there used to be multi-generational family units and housing, then you're more dependent upon purchasing to replace those services that were provided. Okay. And then if you look at the trend, we went from the nuclear family, single family unit to the single person unit, where we're all now seeking enlightenment individually through our own devices. People and their one device are divided. It's if you keep people divided, they can never realize. This is what I experienced was the extreme of this, but I feel like people in society itself have become more isolated in a way, and the more engaged they are with their self-soothing and media consumption is a way of keeping people divided. Like, I was physically divided from others, so I could not relate to them what I was going through to realize they were going through something similar, so we could bond and go through it together. And if you do that with the whole society by separating everyone out, then they'll never conspire against the powers that be.
So that's funny, because I have a completely opposite view.
Oh, really?
Of when I look at society as a whole, I don't think we've ever been as connected as we are now through the internet and through social media. It's brand new. It's so new that we barely have time to even have any sensible studies done on it. Mm-hmm. So I can't say anything for sure. I can't talk from a sociological perspective or something. I can only talk from my own experience, and that is that we have I think in some ways we're too connected.
Oh yeah.
In terms of the way that there's a lot of divisiveness in the country and whatnot, and there's all kinds of mechanisms in place to do that. I'm not arguing that point, but I think that we have, I think technologically we've come to a place where we are up in each other's grills all day, every day through social media. Yeah. Not everybody's tied into that machine, but a great number of people are. Who walks around without a phone anymore, right? Without looking like they're the weird one.
I'll say that. Yeah, the social networks are wider than they've ever been,
and people spend more time.
But are they deep? Are they as deep as they were?
That's a subjective question that I don't think anybody's really prepared to answer quite yet.
Yeah.
But because I think it's, you could go case by case. I could give you plenty of cases where there are very deep connections with people who have never met in real life. Mm-hmm. And I could give you plenty of cases where it's all Instagram relationships.
Right.
So it's too new to tell. Yeah. But I push back just slightly on the idea that we are, have never been so alone. I go, I have an alternative perspective on that. Okay. And I still think we have a ways to go to figure out where this is all going to go in the wash, how it's going to wash out, to say. And of course, we have some other pressing issues with climate change and things like that are that clock is ticking.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I don't know, I hope we have the time to see the studies 50, 100, 200 years from now.
Yeah.
On some of that. Those are the things that concern me. But I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Fair enough. Yeah. Yeah, the technology is just so new. You're right. There is not a lot of data.
But the potentiality of our connectedness,
it's
the wealth of information at our fingertips.
Right.
We have never had. You can't model current society on any historical model.
No.
Because we have nothing to look back on that gives us a similar, comparable model to what we have now with the internet.
Right.
That one factor alone changes everything.
To an extent. I mean, we're still humans. There's still the human element that can be studied, and there's that control, but the internet variable, there is a lot to it. It is also exciting to see that there is so much potential for connecting, for communicating, for you look at the Arab Spring, for organizing, for activism.
That's right.
And yet it's not totally like you would hope that something would have erupted from it. Like what baffles me is that it doesn't really baffle me, but it frustrates me is that the rise of Uber and Lyft is a great utilization of technology. It's a fantastic harnessing of that power, but it's still it's got its dark side too. Uber's got its problems. As a whole, it may not. I don't know why everybody's jockeying to be unlicensed cab drivers when we're about to go into a driverless society. It's kind of like the last gasp of desperation.
Well, there's old models on which we build things, and yet we have the potentiality of some amazing new models that are not generally being recognized for what they are,
right? And
people are slow to change, right? They are pretty conservative in a lot of ways. I don't mean politically. I mean just they are. Just
sure. Well, you need to be. You shouldn't adopt every new thing that comes out there because that could be harmful, right?
Systems. Yeah. So we're really in flux right now.
Oh, absolutely.
And
absolutely.
I think there's a lot of. I'm optimistic by nature, so I'm horrible that way. So I always try to think of the best possible scenarios and push in that direction while recognizing the faults and traps and problems that we all fall into and try to temper my optimism with those realities.
Yeah.
So but it's, like I said, I had to push back a little bit on that.
And that's fine. It's it's a tough journey balancing those things. Not to be so overwhelmed and demoralized that you can't do something.
Yes.
But the point I was going to make with the Uber is that with that technology, it would be perfect for there to be, say, a collaborative, nonprofit, truly ride-sharing infrastructure. And it has the technology. We could build it, we could have it, but instead you have yet another predatory, for-profit, exploitative to the masses system that rises up. And I think that goes back to the fact that that's the economic model that everything will go into the shape of until an alternative is presented.
Which was exactly my point.
Right.
That's right. The old model's still
right.
And especially in the United States, more so I think than what I've experienced from or seen from other countries.
Sure.
We're so
we're singular.
We're so ritualized around capitalism and the how it's the best of it's so Pollyannish. It's the best of all possible worlds.
Right. You
kind of go, let's have a little bit more critical thinking about this.
Right. And you're speaking of internationally, there's some alternative methods, or there's some holdout for a strong, stable worker party or welfare for all, but it's under attack.
Right.
More so than ever.
Right.
And it's losing ground because what we created here with the singular market idea, is it just pushes everything out. And now it's no longer even American. Like, we've created these American corporations, started as American corporations, but are now just these huge conglomerate monsters that have no allegiance whatsoever. I mean, Apple went on record saying, what do we owe the American people?
Right.
Nothing. Because, we built it. And the thing is that all these huge companies that are successful and billion-dollar industries, they couldn't come to fruition the way they are now in the system, in the structure of what they've shaped it to be now. They have so much control that they are prohibitive of anyone challenging it.
Right.
So you can't actually, you can't even do what was happening in the 80s.
It's a problem.
It is a problem. Richard Wolff has some great material on it. He's a fantastic Marxist economist, and has some podcast interviews that are really worth listening to.
Okay. Yeah, I think was it you who sent me a link on one?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I have to check those things out.
Alternative Radio does some really good stuff. They get really great speakers.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we have gone from the family unit to looking at the problems of the world, from a macroscope, and we're running out of time, so we're gonna start wrapping up.
Okay.
But I knew this was going to be somewhat of a random conversation,
sure.
Right? You're not, particularly like some, celebrity or something, and I wanted to find out a different perspective on the Gothard thing, because I've interviewed Christiana, I've talked to some other people. I wanted to get a perspective on that, and I wanted to get your perspective on, from that into secularism, and we talked about that a bit, and then branched out into something huge, which was awesome.
Sure.
So where I guess the only other point I wanted to touch on was you also got into comedy.
Yeah.
I just want to touch on that just for a second, because I was curious, how did you go from this like kind of horrible thing to sort of let's make people laugh?
Yeah. Well, I was always making people laugh. Okay. I don't know if you know this, but a lot of humor comes from dark places.
Yes.
So plenty of that to pull from. And then I did move to Denver 2.5 years ago from Colorado Springs. I finally emancipated myself.
And it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a whole different world down there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a great town. Colorado Springs is a great town if you're a Bible,
right?
Which I'm not, so that didn't work out. So I'm in Denver and did pursue comedy. I always wanted to perform. And then I started doing improv, and the improv is where you just make stuff up with other people. And there's some really great theaters here in Denver with some fantastic drop-in. Everybody's welcome. And so that really helped me break the ice, and that actually did help me overcome quite a bit of social anxiety, and being more open to situations and people and to people that were very different than me and challenging. Also, I will say that when I worked at the Broadmoor Hotels, where I trained as a chef, I worked there 8 years total, working my way up the ranks and learning. And for Colorado Springs, it's a really good pocket there's a lot of international students that go there to train, and are part of their school. They have to have on-hand experience, on job. So I met international students a lot. So actually, from my experience of Colorado Springs, I was in this pocket that was very diverse.
Interesting.
Yeah, so there's a couple hundred foreign students that come there that work year round, and in the summer we have Jamaicans come and with work visas and things like that. So I was actually experienced a lot of diversity for Colorado Springs, and which I'm eternally grateful. But yeah, so I did move to Denver to do comedy some, and also just branch out and experience more things, and really let the rubber hit the road, if it were, to really put some things into place and implement some new life choices. I reached out. That's when I started reaching out quite a bit more to the homeschool forums online, which if you're a homeschooler, go ahead and reach out. There's a lot of Facebook groups, and even just finding a few people who to relate to can really say, hey, this isn't just a me problem. This is something that happened to other people, and that can be really powerful. And then sometimes you'll meet people that aren't so nice, which I have too. And they're the homeschoolers are a touchy bunch, and there's a lot of pain and a lot of history there, and so so be patient and give people time to grow. So I've been doing, people can check me out on all around town. I perform stand up, I host shows, I produce shows, I do improv now and again. I've got a few YouTubes on there. You can look up Andrew Forlines, get some homeschool chuckles.
Awesome.
Yeah, and then Secular Hub. I really want people to check out Secular Hub because it's it's not we were talking about firebrand atheists that are yelling about it. It's a very relaxed atmosphere, but it's also, I find that it's what you make it. And actually, Secular Hub is a group, but it's also the physical place. And I find that that's helpful for people to understand. The Secular Hub is just a building utilized by many different groups, whose members who are members of multiple groups. So it depends on what day you go there. I myself, I host the dinner and a documentary series where every month we do a dinner potluck, and then we watch a documentary, and then we stick around and discuss it. So that's been really a lot of fun and a really great opportunity for people to get together and converse over similar ideas and topics, and then also be exposed to things and people that they're not usually. So this month, I invited the International Socialist Organization's Denver chapter to co-host with me and pick the documentary. So we're going to watch a documentary on the Russian Revolution, and we're going to eat vegan Russian food, which I guess is boiled beets, and then we'll discuss the documentary, and it's always a good time. We have a lot of fun. So yeah, I just encourage everyone out there to connect with someone, and reach out and find someone to meet up with, or find a group or an organization, and don't be too steadfast your knee-jerk reaction or what you think it's going to be like. Go experience it and decide what it's like for yourself.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Good advice. All right, folks. Well, we're going to wrap it up now. So, Andrew, thank you very much for coming around and doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, a little couch talk here.
Yeah, a little comfy couch time.
That's right. Now,
now I'm gonna go see Blade Runner.
Exactly. Me too. All right, folks. If any comments you have, good, bad, or sideways, go ahead and leave them in the comment section here on YouTube below, or at sensiblyspeaking.com, where the podcast is hosted. And give us a click on a review. If you're listening on iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play, where this podcast is also hosted, I would like your feedback on those platforms as well. Thanks for coming around, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.